but we are learning.
Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you. Thank you for coming. I have to just do some housekeeping here on the computer. Earlier, when I was setting up, I thought a spirit was communicating with me, but it was Idolo on the other side of the computer setting it up. So he tricked me. I think I knew it was him, but it was funny. All of a sudden, a little note pops up. All right, now I can see. And you guys can see. Yeah, what about that box right there? How can we get rid of that dialog box so that you guys can see the screen? Still there, huh? Well, we'll make do, huh? I don't want to mess up the transmission, so I will leave it alone. Minimize it. Well, oh, how about this way? Oh, there you go. Is it there on the minus? Yay. Thank you, guys. I appreciate the help. So tonight's talk is from a couple different sources, mostly from Open Your Hearts and Find Happiness, chapter 7, which was by the Spirit Joanna De Angelis, psychographed by Devaldo Franco. Then obviously there's a little bit in here from the Gospel According to Spiritism, which was by various spirits psychographed or codified, actually compiled by Allan Kardec. So as usual, I like to say I can really take no credit for the content. It's all from these fine books. Oh, you gotta be kidding me. All right, let's try it this way. It's not moving. There we go. Awesome. The book on the left, obviously, is the main focus tonight. The chapter 7 is called The Three Enemies. Anybody have an idea what the three enemies are? You were close because you said ourselves, right? So there's some part that all three of these would fall in these, but this chapter highlights three specific enemies that we encounter. All right, they're highlighted, I should say, in chapter 7: depression, resentment, and egotism. How many of you have never experienced any of those? Because I want to be just like you. I want you to come up and give the talk. Yeah. But it dives into all three of these. Depression being the first that we're going to talk about. All right. But overall, Joanna describes these as each of them in their own right as being extremely cruel. And she talks about the sordid process of persecution. Just that one word, persecution alone, makes you think of cruelty, right? That as you're living your life, as you're going throughout your day, these enemies can pop up when they're least expected. You can be on cloud 9, just everything's going great in your life. You're doing everything right, or so you think, and they just pop up their ugly head and assume a threatening position in your life, all right? Which will cause you disturbance, which can then lead to further disturbance, oftentimes leading you to give up and not participate in things if it goes untreated or unchecked. Oftentimes, when I find one of these enemies in my life, it actually gets to the point where I don't want to come here, right? But I know that by coming here, I'm gonna push back, and sure enough, I feel better after I show up here on Thursday nights. But all of these three things, all of these three situations, just can happen, no matter how well we think we're doing. And that when we're attacked by these enemies, right? People that wake up every morning with a noble sentiment, right? They really want to follow the way. They really want to work hard. They really want to succeed, right? So they're noble. They're hardworking. They have courage. They can fail just because of one of these three enemies or a combination of all three. Because when we put our guard down, when we don't think about it, when we go on autopilot sometimes, these elements can just reduce the joy from our relationships and from our work and from our interactions, leading us to just having a really bad day, a bad week, a bad month, a bad couple of years. So she really cautions us to be on the lookout for these three enemies. She describes them as a morbid vapor. What's another way to say morbid vapor? Deadly gas, right? Into some way, they contaminate people. Resentment, depression, egotism can just penetrate you unexpectedly so and contaminate you and the way you interact with people. Typically, she says, before we're even aware of it, right? I notice that with myself sometimes. I'll be doing great. I think I'm doing fine. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, something comes over me where I'll feel sad or I'll get cocky or arrogant, right? I'll be a different person talking to people, or I'll have bad relationship situations with people that I'm close to, that I love, where there's resentment setting in, just out of the blue, where you think everything's going fine. This obviously leads to mental instability in some cases, and a lack of interest in life if we don't face them with the appropriate attention or effort on how to keep them out of our lives. She says here that without appropriate effort, these invaders will shelter in our hearts and minds, where is not a good situation. So depression, Joanna defines as similar to an unexpected darkness in broad daylight. And what pops in my head for that is like an eclipse, right? Where the clouds are going in front of the sun, and it's total darkness during the day when you think it shouldn't be, right? Storm clouds covering the sun. She also describes it as a toxin that slowly poisons the person. Because typically we don't wake up 100% depressed on a Monday, right? Maybe we're a little hesitant on Monday. It creeps up a little bit worse on Tuesday. It's a steady progression. And exactly how she describes it, a slow poison or a toxin that slowly intoxicates us, not just hitting us all at once. So at the earliest signs and symptoms, right, we need to be assertive. Resentment, she defines, as similar to mold. How many of you have some mold in your house? A little bit, maybe? I hope not, right? But I've got this one shower in the house that it's poorly ventilated. And the guy that redid the bathroom years ago said, listen, just leave that bathroom fan on in the toilet area. I know it's not right there, but if you leave that on all the time and you don't close the door, you won't have any mold. Well, that noise is annoying sometimes, and I don't want to hear the fan, or we forget, right? And then every once in a while, you'll start to see just a little bit of stuff show up. And if you get up there right away and scrub, right, because you didn't leave the fan on like you're supposed to, you get it and it's no big deal. But if you go too long, next thing you know, you could have 10, 15, 20 spots of mold, right? And that's what she describes as resentment. You have a fertile environment, right, where other things live, but mold can come in if you don't keep it clean. And before you know it, you've got this favorable environment turned destructive, right? Because if you let mold go for too long, it's poisonous, it's toxic, it ruins things. So that's how she describes resentment. So try to leave your bathroom fan on is the advice, right? Egotism. Notice of all the slides so far, this has got the most bullet points, right? I'm a big believer that ego is our worst enemy, right? And that's my word. That's my contribution. Joanna's not telling us that, but anytime you got 5 or 6 things listed for a condition, You know it's pretty bad, right? What does she tell us? Identical to a devastating electrical shock hitting the nervous system. How many have ever had shock therapy or stuck your finger in an outlet accidentally? It's no fun, right? That's what she's describing our egotism as, right? Identical to a devastating electrical shock hitting the nervous system, producing flashes of madness. How often do we go out of our head sometimes with our ego? So mad at somebody that attacked our vanity or our pride, right? Or told us they were better than us or showed us they were better than us, right? You can just have these flashes of madness, right, is what she describes. A thunderstorm of insolence and revolt, right? You're so hung up on yourself, or you so believe in what you're doing, right, that you just revolt other people's ideas, right? And you're insolent to your boss or to people that might know more than you. And that will weaken, right, your ideals of life, and it destroys those who fall into its grasp, right? We're all susceptible to ego and pride. And left in check or unchecked, it can lead to our ruin in short time. So Joanna, for those of you that have read her books, even these short stories, there's this book that we're talking about tonight. It's 1.5 pages, maybe 2 pages per chapter. But Joanna, to me, writes like a graduate instructor, a psychologist, teacher, where she's very direct and to the point about the problem, very direct about its destructive nature and what it can do in its worst case. And then comes the love and the hope and the solution. She always ends with how you can fix things. So I love reading. It's hard reading in the beginning, but I just love how she wraps everything up with a happy ending or positive advice in little pieces that we can all do a little bit more. And she says, look, yes, these 3 enemies, right? Resentment, depression, and egotism, right? They're real. You have to be on guard. They can creep into your life when you least expect it. But there's very simple things you can do on a regular basis to fight them. What's at the top of the list? Prayer. How many of you think you pray too much? Is there such a thing? I know a few people, they pray a lot. I wonder sometimes, right? But they make me feel like I should do more, right? My point is, you can never pray too much, right? Prayer is a good thing, right? What's the next thing on the list for all 3 of these enemies? Continuation of work. How many of you watched that? Have you seen that video on YouTube where it's a retired Navy admiral giving a speech at a commencement? He says, look, if you don't do anything else when you get out of bed, make your bed, right? Because if you can just do something, you make your bed first thing, you're going to have a sense of accomplishment. And that's what continuation of work reminds me. Just do something. Get up and do something. Because you start your day with a small win, a small victory, and that can lead to more. And then love in an incessant and disinterested way, right? Love forever, right? Like it's never going to die. And where you have no vested interest, right? Unconditional. Just love for the sake of loving. You're not going to gain anything out of it. You're not going to ever see it stopping. Those 3 conditions or tools are at our disposal every day to reduce the likelihood of these 3 enemies seeping into our day. So for depression, the prescription, right, the medicine, the work, right, that Joanna tells us is one should immediately use a vaccine of courage via prayer. Right? When we talk about prayer, we have lectures on prayer all the time where prayer comes up in many of our talks. What do we talk about? Right? Not the length, not the location, right? But that it's from the heart, that it's sincere, right? And not praying for an outcome, right? When we pray, even though we might pray for outcomes necessarily, but what is prayer really doing for us, right? It's not necessarily giving us the winning lottery numbers. It's not necessarily making our boss nicer to us. It's not necessarily making the love of our life come back or what have you, right? Solving these material problems. What prayer does for us is it initiates that connection with God, with positive energy, right? With our guardians, right? And that dose of courage, right, steps in. It gives us the strength. It gives us the courage to face whatever challenges we're encompassing. So my kid might be praying for a new skateboard, right? Because she broke hers, right? But what she's really doing in that act of that prayer is for the strength to keep going in the absence of something that she wants, right? Because we don't necessarily always get what we want, but prayer helps us connect and receive what we need, which in the moment is courage, strength, determination, compassion, things like that. Make sense? All right. And there's just, the definition of courage. If you're like me, you like to look words up to make sure you don't mess them up, right? Right. Courage is simply that ability to do something that frightens one, right? To face our fears. Strength in the face of pain or grief. For resentment, right? Joanna's prescription, right? The medicine for resentment is use the lucid reasoning of love, which expects nothing in return, right? That was one of the first things she said in that earlier slide. The lucid reasoning of love, right? Love is amazing, right? When it's unconditional, when it's pure, when it doesn't expect anything in return, right? Love your neighbor like you would yourself, right? Love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, right? No expectation of anything in return. That's how you fight resentment. And then for egotism, she tells us to use the comfort of meditation. It says, as I say meditate, I almost thought I wrote mediation. But it's meditation, right? Use the comfort of meditation. What happens when we stop? Let's talk about egotism first. What is egotism? Right? We're just full of ourselves, right? We know more than everybody. You can't tell me what to do. I'll tell you how we're going to do it. I know the solution. I don't need God. I'm going to do it my way, right? That's egotism. We're so caught up in being able to do everything ourselves that we don't ask for help. We don't listen to others. We don't feel like anyone's helping us, right? Well, when we meditate, what are we doing? Disconnecting from materialism, right? Disconnecting from ego, right? And connecting to God. Right? You can't be connected to God and your ego at the same time, necessarily, right? They're kind of competing energies, right? In a lot of ways, at least when you're over the top with egotism. So by identifying that your ego is getting the best of you, by identifying that you're putting yourself ahead of others at their expense, right? By meditating, you kind of break that. You reconnect your energy, and you reconnect with God, and you start over, start fresh, rebalance. Make sense? Awesome. I got to remember this next time. So Joanna goes on to tell us that the dedicated Christian faces difficulty when depravity is given license. A lot of examples of depravity out there, right? Depravity. When cruelty is applauded, where stupidity enjoys support. Those top three, what do you think of? Depravity is given license, cruelty is applauded, and stupidity enjoys support. What can we stay off of and avoid the first three? Social media, right? Right? All those three things they exist so much if we spend too much time in the wrong places on social media. So she goes on to say that the dedicated Christian also faces difficulty when corruption prevails by legal statute, right? The low level of moral behavior measures the low level of moral behavior measures men by inferior scale, right, and women by foolish conduct. So when you think about headlines, the newspaper, magazines, social media, when you think about what we as a society praise and applaud, right, there's a ton of people succeeding materially and advancing, right? They become icons or role models to some degree, or what we want to be like when we grow up, right? And a lot of these people are advancing, right, in these types of activities. It's not often that you see, what's a good example? Mother Teresa, right? You don't see necessarily that type of work out in the mainstream media. You don't see the stories of the gospel or Christ, right? Mainstream. You don't see the good deeds that the little boy does, publicized in the paper, right? But you see all the bad stuff, right? It's very rare that you see good news or good examples publicized. So because of that, right, even though here you are on a Thursday night listening to a guy like me, right, you're doing your part at home, you're studying, you're praying, you wake up with that noble intent every day to be a follower of the way. You're bombarded by a lot of this stuff, right? You're exposed to it. And it's very easily can creep in if you're not on guard. So we're encouraged to not fall into this and try to avoid the trappings of these things. Because Joanna tells us that it's common, right, for greed, arrogance, and violence to take over us, right, to spread in a dominant way to maintain the status quo, right? How many of us fall victim to that? You know, I'm very fashionable. This is everybody's wearing this. I'm just kidding. I'm not. I think I've been wearing the same stuff for years. But my point is, how often do we want to have the horse on our shirt, or the emblem on our car, or we want to be the best in whatever business we're in? And there's nothing wrong with success. We're not suggesting that. But when greed and arrogance become doing whatever it takes, right, including violence, to be the winner, to be the best, to succeed in this material life, it's a problem, right? Because it takes us over. And before you know it, we fall victim to these three enemies, just trying to maintain the status quo, right? Because when you can't be the best, right, you can't have the most money, you can't have the best car, you can't have the nicest fashion, whatever it is you're chasing, right? What happens? You get depressed, right? You can become very resentful, and then you resort to all kinds of ways, whether your ego, to try to make yourself better. So that's the point of this slide. It's very common to give in to let these things lead us down a path where we experience those three enemies. All right. So by example, Joanna tells us, Jesus asks us to become an unconquerable fortress, right? Impenetrable, right? How do we make ourselves impenetrable? How do we make ourselves invincible by that example, right? Because when we adopt his example, right, the way he lived, right, the gospel, the good news is all the stories of how he lived and what he said and what he did, and the idea here is by becoming a follower of his way, right, walking in his light, we are less likely to comply or fall victim to violence, to ego, to greed, to arrogance, right? Because if we're walking in his light, we're less likely to sink to a lower level, right? And we're not going to hang out with these groups of people that are chasing those things or bringing us down. Make sense? So easy to say, right? But it's hard to do sometimes, because we all have our moments when we're vulnerable. So she tells us, be cautious and watchful, keeping your inner self joyful and tranquil. How do you make yourself joyful and tranquil? We all have our own ways, yeah? But she's told us a couple of them. Prayer, right? Spending time with other people that are joyful and tranquil. That's why I'm here on Thursday night. There's 20 other people that seem joyful and tranquil, right? This is good company. Keeping in mind the honor of doing the duty that you asked for. What does that mean? What did you guys ask for? You remember? Think way back before you were born. Right? Your spirit tied to you now by your perispirit. That eternal being created lifetimes ago, simple and lacking knowledge by God, living multiple lives, carrying with it life after life, your experiences, your moral development, your knowledge, and your debts. What did you decide before you were born in this life? Do you remember? No. By the grace of God, we don't remember, right? Because that would also entail remembering the mistakes we made to be in the state that we are, right? And the goals that we made. But prior to being born in this life, you, me, us, right? We had a meeting, if you will, with our guardian, with our mentors, right? And by the grace of God, we created a plan to correct the error of our ways, to right our wrongs, to pay our debts, and to make our contribution to the good of life. You don't remember it necessarily, but believe you me, right? You came here with a plan. So all she's telling us here is be cautious and watchful, keeping in mind the honor of doing the duty that you asked for and which you will accomplish with God's blessing. God's blessing is simply that we were given life, right? We're here, we're alive, right? And we have the opportunity, the gift, right, of free will that he gave us to walk in the light of Christ, right? To follow his example. And that's how we do it, right? Following that example as much as possible. And if you're like me, you drop the ball and you mess up. All right, we all do. Does that mean you give up and don't try anymore? No. Make your bed, right? Get up and make your bed. Pick up a book, right? Read one page of Happy Life in the morning. Read a page before you go to bed. It's okay to pray at lunch. You don't have to be at home in bed, or, right? You can be driving on I-4. Right? It's probably good to pray. Just don't close your eyes. Right? On I-4, you don't want to get hit. But this is the medicine, right? This is the key. Keep your inner self joyful and tranquil, and remind yourself. Don't let yourself forget that you came here with a duty, with a responsibility to simply improve and to pay your debts. The greatest commandment, right? This is from the gospel, right? From Matthew chapter 22, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And then love your neighbor as yourself. It's so easy to read this. And how often have I read this to myself or out loud in a talk? This is in a lot of talks that you see here, right? So simple, yet so challenging, right? But if you can apply this as much as possible in all of your decisions, it's very unlikely that you're going to hurt people, advance at the expense of others, and pursue material gain over moral improvement. So how does that apply to the topic tonight, right? Well, the first enemy we talked about was depression, right? So here's John. He's 42 years old. He's unemployed because of COVID. He's out of savings, but luckily he's still getting some unemployment, right? He can feed his wife and his kids, right? But he's miserable. He's depressed, right? What can John do? You remember? What did Joanna tell us? What's that? I heard someone. No, I'm just kidding. It's the math. Thank you. Sorry, that's terrible. That was my ego. Sorry. See, Olivia, here I am, right? And I pick on somebody because they wear a mask. I can't finish. I gotta go. I have a suntan. That's right. Yes, pray. That's the first thing. What else did they tell us? Right? What else did Joanna tell us? A vaccine of courage via prayer. That's it. Pray. Don't pray for your dog to come back or your bank account to fill up or to get your job, right? Pray for courage. Pray for whatever you want, but remember that you're not praying for the material things. You're the act of prayer, the act of submitting and asking for help, getting away from your ego and just trusting in a higher power fills you up with that strength and that courage. All right, you're going to get what you need, not necessarily what you want, but you're going to get that dose of courage so that you can face these things that frighten you or that are causing you grief. All right. How many of you have seen this quote before? You know what's interesting about this quote? I saw this attributed to, what's her name? A singer, Demi Lovato, right? I saw this quote. I said, Demi said that? I think somebody else said that. And then, of course, I found the original. And who knows? Maybe it's not, but I'm pretty sure that who knows what to believe on the internet, Livia, right? But this made more sense, right? Seeing St. Augustine, right? But anyways, the definition of the quote here is resentment is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. How many of you have tried that? How'd it work? Not so good, right? I went broke trying to put a competitor out of business years ago, right? Doing everything I could to put that guy out of business because he pissed me off, right? My ego, my pride, right? I resented him so much. Everything he touched worked, right? I'm going to get him though. But I resented the guy, right? And it led to my death, right? Right? How many of you been in a relationship like this? Don't raise your hand if, I don't want to put you on the spot. But it happens, right? That happened at least once last week on vacation with my wife. Don't tell her I told you. I won't go into details, all right? But my point is sometimes we just get mad. It's like, what? Right? And I'm not going to fight. I'm not a yeller. I'm not a screamer. But, man, I can do this sometimes, right? Roll over in bed and have my back to you, right? Not very often, but it can happen. We're all susceptible to this. Who wins in this situation? Nobody, right? Nobody. So what's the solution for resentment? Use the lucid reasoning of love. Love is pure, right? Especially the kind that doesn't expect anything in return. So when we're in this situation, turn it over first. right? Think about that person that you're angry at, that you have resentment for. And just somehow, even if it's not romantic, it could be your boss. It could be your neighbor that drops garbage in your yard. Yeah, yes.
Resentment is such a common thing.
Resentment?
It's such a common.
Yes. I resent your mask right now.
Me too. And I resent my idea too.
But it's safe. But what was your point?
Anyways, I heard somebody saying something that really helped me once.
Please share.
The easiest way to forgive somebody that you are in a relationship that you are resentful for different reasons, that this will happen a million times, right? Is to remember the good things that person has done.
Sure, makes sense. That's great advice.
Really, for me, it really worked, and it really gives me the strength, because if you are in a relationship, you gotta forgive the person a million times, right?
And I'm really sorry for never giving that book back to you.
Well,
That you let me borrow. I'm sure there's at least one.
Well, not really, because I go after you.
It's true. But you're right. Looking back and finding the original, right? We have to be careful with that, though, because I think a lot of times, especially as things become abusive or maybe they're not meant to be saved, you know, I think sometimes we can stay in a bad relationship because we remember how good it was the first, whatever.
That's staying a normal relationship.
I agree. No, you're right. So thank you very much for that. I agree. I agree. So lucid reasoning of love and love which expects nothing in return, unconditional love. And that can be hard at times, but if we can force ourselves to really try to remember that, to connect with that, it's going to help us turn first and apologize or reach out first to start the conversation in whatever relationship that might be. And then, which one do you think this is? That's egotism, right? Your head is just so big. You got to carry it in both hands, and then you even limp a little bit, right? Right? You know everything. Nobody can tell you what to do. God doesn't even know better than you. You know better, right? Crazy, right? Ego. You know what the EGO stands for? I said it last time I talked to you. Remember? Edging God out. Ram Dass taught me that. I can't take credit for that, but ego stands for edging God out. So you just know everything. You're just so knowledgeable, and you can solve the world's problems. You don't need any help. That you just push God completely out of your life. And the bigger your head gets, the bigger your ego gets, the bigger your problems get, and the bigger your fall. Because at some point, we all know that we don't know more than God, and we need God in our lives. Uh-oh. What happened? It's back. Awesome. So the medication, right? The medicine, the solution for egotism, according to Joanna, is use the comfort of meditation, which reestablishes our energies. So why wait until your head is in your hands, right? Why wait to the problem? I'm convinced that daily meditation, maybe twice, 3 times a day, is a good thing. And prayer, meditation, I think you can use those interchangeably to some degree, right? I think they're similar energy, if you will. There's times when I'm just meditating privately, or a mantra of some kind, or a repetition of some kind to disconnect the material state to connect with a higher being, where it's not really praying, but it's accomplishing that same connection. So why wait till you have to meditate? Just get in the habit of daily meditation, daily prayer, to help reestablish yourself on a regular basis, to keep yourself in check. And then ultimately, right, if you can keep this with you, right, just love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And then love your neighbor as yourself. How many of you take time out to love yourself, though? You told us earlier that maybe one of the enemies is ourselves, right? Right? How often are we our own worst enemy? When you get depressed, or you feel defeated, or you don't live up to the plan you made necessarily, how often do we let that escalate and just beat ourselves up? We need to stop, right? Forgive ourselves and just love ourselves as well. so that we can share that with others. So that's all I have for you tonight. Thank you for your time and attention and the technical difficulties in the beginning. So thank you so much.